Well, good afternoon, evening, whatever it might be, wherever you are. We've been having a little debate here, and I've been doing some research. This time of day is called a late afternoon. I don't think it's good to say good late afternoon, so whichever may be your choice. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to From Public Service to Financial Freedom, a webinar on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. I want to thank attendees joining us by Zoom and thank our special guests from Federal Student Aid and the Student Borrower Protection Center for being here today to share critical information to student loan borrowers in the public sector. The Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program was enacted in 2007 with a promise that after 10 years of service with a government or nonprofit entity and 120 qualifying payments, borrowers would see their federal student loan forgiven starting in 2017. Unfortunately, the program has not lived up to its promise. A Government Accountability Office analysis of PSLF in 2018 found that the Department of Education denied roughly 99% of applicants for PSLF from September 2017 through April 2018. This trend continued through March 2019. According to GAO, of the 76,002 loan forgiveness applications that have been processed, the PSLF service had denied 75,138. That's 99% as of March 2019. Through all of 2019, only 2,246 PSLF applications were approved by the servicer out of 161,328 applications filed. In 2020, 296,340 PSLF applications were filed. Only 6,493 applications were deemed eligible by the servicer. To add insult to injury, the Trump administration proposed eliminating the PSLF program in its 2018 and 2019 budget. On October 6, 2021, the Department of Education, under the leadership of President Biden and Secretary Cardona, announced a set of actions to help restore the promise of PSLF and help more borrowers gain forgiveness. So far, more than 175,000 borrowers have received more than 10 billion, with a B, 10 billion of loan forgiveness under the emergency program, which is set to expire on October 31st. In less than 2 months, this program will expire. In sum, the Biden-Harris administration has provided over $32 billion in loan relief to 1.6 million borrowers. In the coming months, there are 43 million Americans with federal student loans will receive some relief under President Biden's recently announced student loan debt relief plan. Here with us this evening to talk more about the PSLF temporary waiver and the student loan debt relief plan, or our special guests, Ashley Harrington, Senior Advisor in the Office of Federal Student Aid at the United States Department of Education, and Mike Pierce, Executive Director of the Student Borrower Protection Center. And I'm pleased to yield to them at this time. Ashley?
Thank you so much, sir. It's a pleasure to be here. This is the second one we're doing. We thank you so much for your continued leadership on student loans and helping us get the word out on this and so many issues. So we really thank you and your team for putting this together. I'm really excited to be here and share not just information about the waiver, but as Mr. Clyburn mentioned, this exciting new news about the debt relief that was announced a little over a week ago that Representative Clyburn and so many of his colleagues fought for. So I'll let Mike go ahead and share his screen and we'll get started. Awesome. We can go to the next slide.
All right.
So we're here today to talk about public service loan forgiveness and the limited waiver, but we have to start by talking about the overall student loan relief that the Biden-Harris administration has provided so far. Next slide. Even before we got to the announcement about a week ago, we had already approved almost $34 billion in debt cancellation for almost 1.7 million borrowers. That is more than any other administration ever. This is a huge deal, and that includes $10 billion for 175,000 public servants through improvements to PSLF, $9 billion for 425,000 borrowers through improvements to how we process total and permanent disability discharges, and over $14 billion for more than 1 million borrowers whose institutions took advantage of them. So it was already a lot of work being done. And then a little over a week ago, we announced a new debt relief plan. Next slide. The Biden administration's new student loan debt plan is going to forgive up to $20,000 for borrowers who went to college and received Pell Grants, up to $10,000 for borrowers who didn't receive Pell Grants, and everyone is eligible for this if they make less than $125,000 as a single person or less than $250,000 as a married household. So this is going to provide immediate relief for so many borrowers. Up to 20 million borrowers are expected to get full cancellation, and the rest will have their payments will be much more affordable. We also extended the student loan pause through December of this year, and we have proposed a new income-based plan to make repayment more manageable and affordable in the long term. You can find more information about the general debt relief plan at studentaid.gov/debt relief. We're here tonight to focus on PSLF, but I hope we want to share that these things work together. They don't preclude each other. You can apply and you should apply for both. You don't want to miss the limited waiver deadline on 10/31. You don't want to miss out on access to this debt relief. That application will be available by early October. You want to get all the relief that you can so that you can better manage your loans and so that you can get out of debt as soon as possible. So we're really excited to be here. I'll turn it back to Mike to start talking about PSLF.
All right. Well, thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Congressman, for the chance to be here again to join you for a second one of these. Ashley and I are going to get into the guts of how these really exciting changes to public service loan forgiveness work for folks that are working in public service. But I'd like to start all of these workshops out by saying, if you've tried to do this before and it hasn't worked for you, this is the right time to give it another try. Hundreds of thousands of public service workers across the country, going back almost 14 years, have gotten tripped up on red tape, misled by student loan companies, just generally run into trouble trying to get their debts canceled under public service loan forgiveness. That is part of why we're here today. What the Biden-Harris administration has done, and Ashley will talk more about the specifics of this, is try to press the reset button on this program to actually keep the promise to public service workers so that if you've worked in public service for 10 years, the government will cancel your student loan debt. I'm going to talk a lot about the weeds here, both about how the program used to work and how it works now. And Ashley's going to talk about the steps you need to take to be able to get back on track. But just know that it all seems complicated and it doesn't need to be this way. And there's lots of additional information on studentaid.gov, which is the government's website that talks about public service loan forgiveness. There's also dozens and dozens of frequently asked questions and instructional videos on forgivemystudentdebt.org, which is a website that my organization runs along with a number of large labor unions, there is lots of support out there for folks, including the Congressman's district office and the team at Federal Student Aid, who can really help you make heads or tails of all of this complicated stuff. So with that, I want to jump into public service loan forgiveness and how it works. So for a long time, going all the way back to 2007, this program required you to do 4 different things. And if you've tried to sort this out in the past, you might have run into this and been confused. And so just know that Ashley's going to talk about how this is all simpler for a limited period of time because of what the Biden-Harris administration has done to make good by these promises to public service workers. But first, I'm going to say what the law says. So what the law says is that you need to have the right kind of loan. You have to be enrolled in the right kind of repayment plan. You have to work full-time for a public service employer, and we'll talk about what that means for just a sec. And then you have to do all of those things every month for 120 months. And after you do that for 120 months, the government will cancel any debt you have left. And that happens tax-free. It happens after you submit some paperwork, and we're going to talk about the mechanics of that. But just know that this was the deal that the law made with people, and folks got tripped up at every one of these steps. To figure out if you have the right type of loan, and we'll talk about how that's changed right now, but just for a little while, the law says you need to have a direct loan. That's a federal student loan made directly by the US Department of Education to somebody that has sought to go to college. And those direct loans are how most people paid for college since 2010. But there are lots of older borrowers out there like me that went to college before 2010 and took out loans from Sallie Mae or from a big bank that was guaranteed by the federal government. And those loans, they're called Federal Family Education Loan Program loans, or FFELP loans. If you're younger and you went to school more recently and you've never touched these loans, don't worry about it. Forget the jargon, forget the acronym. But if you are an older borrower like me, you have one of these older loans made by a bank, or if you have a Perkins loan made by your school, you can turn those loans into the right type of loan, but you have to take some extra steps, and I'll walk you through how to do that today. Under the law, so what the rules used to be and what the law says is if you take those steps to make your old loan into a loan that works for public service loan forgiveness, you're not going to get credit for any payments you made before you took those extra steps. That's all changed, and only for a limited period of time, and Ashley's going to talk about why, but the law says, and you may have been told before, that if you have one of these older loans, you can't get credit for the public service work you've already done. So just know that if you've heard that before, that was right at the time. The Biden administration is working to change that, but maybe only temporarily. We'll also talk a little bit more about what it means to have a parent loan if you work in public service. There is a way forward for you here, but it's a little bit complicated. We also have to be enrolled in the right kind of payment plan. And for most people, that means making payments based on your income, instead of making payments based on how much money you make. That has always been the deal. Millions of people are enrolled in these so-called income-driven repayment plans. They allow folks to pay as little as $0 per month if you make very low wages. And as Ashley mentioned, the Biden administration is making these plans even more generous, cutting folks' monthly payments in half starting next year. There are other payment plans that count. There are other payment plans that don't count. I won't spend time on that because a lot of that's changed, but again, just temporarily. And Ashley's going to talk about those changes. You also have the right type of employment, and we'll talk more about this during the Q&A, I'm sure. The government doesn't care what you do for a living. It only cares about who you work for. So if you work for any federal, state, or local government agency, if you work for any 501c3 nonprofit, or if you work for other kinds of nonprofits that provide certain kinds of services like early childhood education or public health, you will qualify no matter what you do for that organization. You could be a lawyer in the general counsel's office. You could also be a teacher in the classroom. And as long as you work for an organization that counts, you have a right to get your debt canceled. And as long as you're working full time, and that means greater than 30 hours a week based on your employer's definition of full time. And you can tell your employer that working 30 hours a week is all you need to do for the program here. There's lots of organizations that will say, if you don't work 37 and a half hours or 40 hours a week, you don't qualify for benefits. They may not consider you a full-time employee for other reasons, but you could still be a full-time employee for public service loan forgiveness. So just know that the law says 30 hours a week. You need your employer to sign off on it. You can sometimes play let's make a deal with your employer, but the goal here is to just acknowledge the work that you've done, the service that you've done in our communities or to our country, and to get your employer to sign off on that so you can get on track for PSLF. And then the last piece here, again, I won't go into the weeds because in a lot of ways, this is much easier than it used to be, but you have to make payments every month for 120 months. There have been some changes in these rules over time, and I know that there are older public service workers out there that have tried to make heads or tails of this and have been told that making a payment late doesn't count, or making a payment early doesn't count, or paying too much one month doesn't count. A lot of that is much simpler now. The payment counting rules are much more friendly to public service workers. So I just want to acknowledge that a big part of the reason why we're here, a part of the reason things have gone wrong, is that these rules around payment counting messed a lot of folks up, but they're better now. It's also important to know that generally you have to make payments to have them count, except right now. In March of 2020, Congress paused the student loan system. That means that everybody that has a loan the government owns hasn't had to make a payment going all the way back to March of 2020. And that period of time when you didn't have to make payments because of the pandemic, that still counts towards public service loan forgiveness. So everybody that's been in one of these COVID forbearances for the past 2+ years can still get credit towards public service loan forgiveness, even if they have not paid a bill. We talked a little bit at the top about how things have gone wrong for folks. And I think Congressman Clyburn put it really well, talking about just the scale of the broken promises for hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of people across the country. That's the case for these new reforms that Ashley's going to talk about now. We just wanted to acknowledge that tens of thousands of public service workers told their government, backed up by members of Congress like Congressman Clyburn, state attorneys general, and many others, that this just wasn't okay. That in America, we can't break promises to people that have student debt, particularly people working in public service. And the Biden administration asked for feedback from people that had been tripped up and then made their best effort at doing right by everybody. And so with that, I'm happy to hand it back to Ashley, who's going to talk more about what's changed, why things are easier, and how to get your debt canceled.
Thanks, Mike. Great overview. I get to talk about the fun stuff, right? I get to talk about these updates we've made, these time-limited changes that we started last October. Congressman Clyburn talked about all of the people who were denied prior to this and how much progress we've made since this waiver. So you too could be one of these borrowers who gets forgiveness, or you could get closer to forgiveness, which still helps. So we're happy to share this information. Next slide. So last October, we announced something that we call the limited PSLF waiver. Simply, it's time-limited changes to PSLF. We're waiving some of the rules so that borrowers can get credit for periods of repayment that normally don't qualify for PSLF. Under these time-limited rules, you can get credit for any prior period of repayment, no matter the loan program, the repayment plan, whether you made a payment, made the payment on time, or made it in full. So all the things that Mike talked about how you had to be on a certain repayment plan, you had to make a certain type of payment. We're not looking at any of that. We don't care what repayment plan you were on under the waiver. We don't care if you missed a payment. As long as you weren't in default, in school, or in a grace period, you could get credit. We're even counting some periods of deferment and forbearances. This is huge. We're not looking at any of that stuff. We're even letting people get credit for time and repayment on Fell or Perkins loans. So you no longer have to consolidate and start at zero. That is how so many people have gotten forgiveness or closer to forgiveness. You still need qualifying employment. We haven't changed anything about that, but we are giving credit for time we normally didn't give credit for. We just want to know if you're in something we call active repayment status, and we define that very generously. And these changes are for people who already have direct loans, people who have already consolidated into the direct loan program, and everybody who consolidates into the direct loan program by October 31st of this year. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Big piece, payments made prior to consolidation are now eligible. So that means even if you have a Fell or Perkins loan, you still have one now, or you had one before, they used to say you're going to start at zero, right? That was the thing. You can consolidate, you can get in a direct loan program, and you can work towards PSLF, but you're going to start at zero. Under the waiver, that is no longer the case. Under the waiver, you don't start at zero. It's huge. Again, we're not looking at your repayment plan. We're not looking at your loan type. There's exception for Parent Plus, and we'll talk about that. You still have to be full-time employed in public service, and you have to take steps now. I can't stress enough how important it is that you take steps, either consolidation and or doing your PSLF form, which we'll talk about how you do that later, by October 31st of this year, because after that, we go back to normal PSLF rules, and you don't want to miss out on getting all the credit you can before the rules go back to normal. Next slide. So you could be a borrower and you could fall into one of three groups. You could only have direct loans. If you only have direct loans, you just want to make sure you have a PSLF form on file. That's how you raise your hand. You don't need to consolidate if you have only direct loans. The only reason you might want to consolidate if you have only direct loans is if you have loans that have been in repayment for different periods of time. So say you went to undergrad, went and then started working in public service, and then went back to school to grad school and got another degree and got more loans. And now you're back in public service. If you consolidate all those loans now, before the waiver is over, you can then, that entire consolidation loan will get all of the credit for the undergrad loans and the grad loans, and you could potentially get those grad loans forgiven sooner. They'll get forgiven at the same time as the undergrad loans. But if all of your loans are generally the same amount, have spent the same amount of time in repayment, and you just have direct loans, you don't have to worry about consolidating. You just want to get that form in. If you've already consolidated to the direct loan program, you want to submit form for the time prior to consolidation, because now you can get credit. And if you still have Feller Perkins loans, you have the most to do, because you've got to consolidate and get that form in, and you've got to do it by 10/31 of this year. Next slide. Quick note about Parent Plus loans, right? Because I'm sure we have a lot of Parent Plus borrowers here. I think we talked about Parent Plus loans are eligible for PSLF, and that is based on the parent's employment, not the student's. But you won't get any additional credit under the waiver. What I mean by that is, for the other direct consolidation loans, you're not starting at zero, right? You can get credit for the Feller Perkins loans as underlying. If you have a direct consolidation loan with an underlying Parent Plus, you're not going to get any additional credit for the time when it was purely a regular old Parent Plus loan. You won't get any additional time there. You could get additional time for the time after consolidation if you missed a payment or you were on the wrong repayment plan or something like that, but nothing pre-consolidation. If you had a Parent Plus loan and your own student loan and you consolidated those together, you could then get additional credit based on the student loan for that entire loan, but not based on the parent loan. Next slide. So we do want to note a couple of things about consolidation, because so many folks have to consolidate, take advantage of this. And I will say, we have taken a lot of the sting out of consolidation. Prior to this, consolidation had a bad name to it. It was for a reason, right? You consolidated, you started at zero for PSLF. You consolidated, you started at zero for income-based repayment. You did all of these things. Under the waiver and under the other actions we are taking, that is no longer the case. There's never been a better time to consolidate. So, but there are still a couple of things that happen. Your payment will change, right? Because it's essentially a new loan. Your payment could go down, but it also could go up. It could increase. And that's because once you consolidate, if you no longer have a partial financial hardship, you may not have access to some of the more affordable income-based plans. So just something to keep in mind. If you have unpaid interest and fees, it'll get capitalized and your principal balance will go up. Now, most of these things you're probably not worried about if you're working towards PSLF, because you're just trying to get to 120 and get that forgiven. But we do want to make sure you know about them. Your new consolidation loan will generally have a new interest rate. It's going to be based on a weighted average of the loans you consolidate. Again, if you're working towards PSLF, you likely don't care about a lot of this. And you don't have to consolidate all of your federal student loans. You can consolidate 1 loan, 5 loans, 6 loans. It's up to you. But once you consolidate those loans, once they're dispersed, you can't undo it. Next slide. So another big thing we announced earlier this year, back in April, was something called an IDR payment count adjustment. This is the other piece that took that sting out of consolidation, because you're not starting at zero. But it also has some other big pieces we want to flag. Borrowers can get credit now for periods of long-term forbearances. So if you have periods of 12 or more months consecutive or 36 more months cumulative, you can get credit towards IDR. And if you certify employment, you can also get credit towards PSLF. This is a big deal, and we're going to try to implement, and we'll be implementing this automatically later this year and next year, but you still have to certify employment. We're also giving credit for time and deferment prior to 2013, as long as it was an in-school deferment, and credit for economic hardship deferments after 2013. And again, all of this is going to get applied automatically, but you still have to certify employment. Next slide. So we just want to flag quickly that there's a lot going on and all of these things take time. So if you're waiting, you've applied, and you haven't heard anything, just be patient with us. Just know that as long as you've done your part, you've got your forms in, you've consolidated your stuff, you've done everything you can do, the rest is on us. Don't worry about whether you haven't heard anything. If you do your part, you will not be held responsible for how long it takes us to process your form, any delays that we have. We just want you to do your part. As long as you do that by October 31st, you're good. We also want to flag that many borrowers are being transferred to MOHELA if they're already in PSLF, or if you're a new PSLF borrower, you're submitting forms to MOHELA, even though you previously heard about Fed loan servicing. There's nothing to worry about here. Transfers are a normal part of the servicing process. Nothing is going to change about your accounts, your terms, anything like that. So don't worry. I was transferred recently. It's going to be okay. It's a normal part of the process. MOHELA is now the PSLF servicer as of July 1st. Next slide. I'll turn it back to Mike. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, Ashley, for sharing all the good news about how this has become just so much easier for folks who are trying to get their debts canceled. I'm going to talk now through a bunch of the specific pieces that Ashley mentioned. But first, this is how you get started. So to make sure that you are able to get on track and take advantage of this new opportunity, Ashley mentioned you need to either have a direct loan already, or you need to take these older federal loans and turn them into direct loans. So to figure out whether you have to take that step, first you need to go to studentaid.gov and figure out what kind of loan you have. And so you do that by logging in. You can create a credential. It's very easy. You can do it in a kind of a single sitting, just register just like you would any other website. This is also the same place where you applied for federal financial aid. You may have used it to enroll in a different repayment plan. So you might already have a login. But what you'll get is what's called your student aid dashboard. And that'll give you all the information you need to know about all the loans the government knows you took out, whether those are older federal loans made by a bank or by Sallie Mae or by your school through the Perkins Loan Program, or whether they're newer federal loans made directly by the Secretary of Education through the Direct Loan Program. And you can see that by looking at the details. If you need even more information, there's a way to actually download the administrative record for your loan by clicking on this My Student Aid Data button. But for most folks, you probably won't need that. You can just look at your details and you'll see a screen like this, and it will show you what loans you have that still have balances. It will also show you if you've already taken out a consolidation loan to pay off some of those older loans. That's what this person's screenshot shows. But if you see things like Perkins loans with an outstanding balance, or anything that says FFEL or Federal Family Education Loan, that means you're going to have to take this extra step to consolidate. So once you've done this checkup, you've taken a look at the loans on your account, if you've decided that you do have to take the step to swap those loans out, turn them into a new direct loan, I'm going to show you how you do that too. So consolidating your loan, that's just student loan speak for paying off your old loan with a new loan and then owing that new loan to the Department of Education. It works sort of similar to refinancing a mortgage. You are basically just taking out a new loan from the federal government and using it to pay off those old loans, and the owner of your old loan gets paid and you owe a debt to the government now instead. And that makes you eligible for the debt cancellation that Ashley talked about at the beginning through this new Biden administration initiative. That's the $20,000 or $10,000 for the debt relief. It also makes you eligible to get on track for public service loan forgiveness. It is a really important step. And to do that, you go right back to studentaid.gov, same place we were before. You log in and you go to manage your loans. And instead of going to public service loan forgiveness, which we'll talk about in a minute, you're going to go to consolidate my loans, and you can fill out this electronic application to be able to consolidate your loans. These are screenshots of what it actually looks like, but on forgivemystudentdebt.org, we have step-by-step instructions and an instructional video on how you actually navigate this process, along with frequently asked questions if you need more help. But know that you can fill this application out electronically in a single sitting, and once you're done, the government will take that application and process it. It will let you select your student loan company. Because you're here today, I assume you're working in public service and you want to get on track for public service loan forgiveness. So you should select this company called Mohela, Mohela. They are the company that the government pays to handle the public service loan forgiveness program. They're going to help you count up your payments. They're also going to help you get on track. And once you select your student loan servicer, you'll also be able to go through a couple of other prompts, confirm the loans that you want to be included, select a payment plan. Everybody that wants to pursue public service loan forgiveness should select an income-driven payment plan. And then you'll sign and submit for processing this application to consolidate your loans. And then you're off to the races. And everybody needs to do this. Everybody who has one of these older loans needs to do this by October 31st. You shouldn't wait though, you should do it right now. And normally we would tell folks to do this first, let it get processed, and then fill out your application for public service loan forgiveness. Ashley's gonna talk more about this in just a second, but don't wait. Do everything at once. We're at the deadline now. You have just a bit more than 6 weeks to get your paperwork in process, to get your debt canceled. So if you need to consolidate, don't wait any longer and don't wait to hear back. Just fill out your consolidation application right now. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Ashley.
Thanks, Mike. So now we're going to talk about how you actually apply for PSLF using the help tool. That's the best way to do it. We really encourage you to use our help tool to apply. Next slide. So we have a really great employer database that we work very hard to improve all of the time. And we recently launched a new PSLF employer search tool, because normally to see which employers are in our system already, you had to have a studentaid.gov account, log into your account, and then you could see it. Now we have a publicly available database. It's really great. You don't have to log into your account to see it. So please use that. Next slide. But if you're actually applying for PSLF, you're going to want to generate a form that looks like this. This is the physical form. And while you can download it and fill it out, we prefer you to use our PSLF help tool because it helps us process your stuff faster. Next slide. So you can get to the help tool at studentaid.gov/PSLF. It's right here, and then you'll log in. Next slide. You'll log in using your studentaid.gov account. And the first thing it's going to ask you for is your employer information. And you're going to need something called an EIN, employer identification number. It's found in your W-2 in box B. It's on your pay stub, and it's on, or you can ask your HR department for it directly. But you're going to need the EIN for every single employer you want to get credit for. And you're going to put it in here to our help tool. And just to flag a couple things that could happen with our help tool. It's really great, but it's not perfect. It doesn't have every single qualifying employer for PSLF. It doesn't have every single employer that exists. It's never going to be perfect. So you may get a result that doesn't make sense. You may get something that says ineligible or likely ineligible, which just means undetermined. And you might be like, what is going on? If that happens, still continue, complete the form. It will create a case for our employer team. They're going to look at it. And as long as it's later approved, you're going to be okay. You've met the deadline. If it pops up as eligible, that's great. It's already in our system and you're good to go. But some folks, that's not going to happen for, and that's okay. And remember, you just have to do your part. The rest is on us. But you're going to need the EIN for every single employer you want to get credit for. Next slide. So you'll put those in, you'll click next, you'll go to this next page that talks about consolidation and COVID-19 relief. Next slide. Then you'll have this section on application details, which is really just asking you, do you have 120 payments or not? And even if you think you have 120 payments, because you listened to our whole presentation and you know that we're going to count your consolidation stuff, we're going to count some deferments, all of that, and you're definitely going to be at 120. If our system doesn't think you're at 120 yet, because you haven't consolidated yet or something hasn't happened, you still have to put no. It doesn't change how your application is processed or what we do with it, but you do have to put the answer that aligns with what our system believes. Next slide. Then you'll get to your personal information. All of this is going to be pre-filled out because you've logged into your account, but if you want to make a change, you can. Next slide. And then you're going to get to review and save. You're going to make sure everything looks right. You're going to click save. Next slide. And then you're going to get this confirmation page. If you had eligible employers, you're going to get a PDF that's already filled out that looks like that form I showed you a few slides ago. And once you have that, now comes the fun part. You've got to print it out. You've got to sign it. You got to get it signed by the employer, and then you got to submit it to Mohela. If Mohila's not your servicer yet, you have to submit it by postal mail or by fax. If they are your servicer, you can do it right online, but you're gonna have to get signatures. Next slide. And so you want to make sure you're following our signature rules, because we are very picky about signatures, and we will send it back, and we don't want you to get yours sent back on a technicality. So you can use a signature that's hand drawn on your signature pad using your mouse or your finger. That's fine. You can use a scanned photo of a signature that was hand drawn on paper and dropped on that PDF. That's fine too. You can do a literal wet signature where you print it out, get an ink pen and sign it. And so does your employer. That's great. Those all work. You can't use a cursive font. So you can't just like go to Microsoft Word or Adobe PDF, type it out in cursive font and drop it in there. Doesn't work. You can't use digital certificate-based signatures. So DocuSign, things like that. Can't use those. Not allowed. So make sure you're following the signature rules both for your signature and your employer's signature. Next slide. I'm going to turn it back to Mike.
All right. So I'm going to share a few tips here that will help make this process a little easier for folks. But really, if you follow the instructions that we've laid out here today, you should be okay. And I do want to make a plug one more time for forgivemystudentdebt.org, in addition to Ashley's website, in addition to the Education Department's website. Forgivemystudentdebt.org has a lot of the information that we've shared today too, broken down step by step with instructional videos and frequently asked questions, and can help clarify some points that maybe we rushed through today because we're trying to get to the Q&A, and we're just trying to make good use of everybody's time. So just know that there's lots of ways to get support out there, and lots of good answers to the questions that you have. They are probably the same questions everybody has. So a few reminders. First, when you're filling out forms here, and this is especially true when you're going to get your employer to sign a form, please don't make hand corrections on the form. The Education Department's website just can't make heads or tails of this. I'm sorry, the Education Department's processors just can't make heads or tails of this. You're going to get your form rejected. I know it's sometimes a pain to get the right person at your organization to focus on this long enough to sign your forms, but if they make these kind of hand corrections because they see that you've got your dates wrong, or they see that you've got an address wrong, it's going to make you start the whole process over. So it's better to just print out a clean form, do it right the first time when you send it in, even if it means a little bit more pain on the other end with your employer. And I know that we are running out of time here, right down to the wire, and that's going to be tough for folks who have to navigate their own work bureaucracy and also the government's bureaucracy. But just keep in mind that the cleaner your forms are to start, the faster they get processed, and the sooner we can cancel your debt. Also, don't worry if you see information that seems wrong. Trust what Ashley told you here today about what these new rules are. There's lots of bad information that's still out there. It's not actually wrong. It's just information about how the law worked before this special Biden-Harris initiative to keep this promise to public service workers. And there's lots of kind of out-of-date information on notices that come from student loan servicers. Sometimes you'll see this on the Education Department's website in pages that haven't been updated. So just know that there are sometimes things you'll get that will say your loans don't qualify because you have an older loan. If you've taken those steps to consolidate, you will get on track. Trust us when we tell you that this has worked for hundreds of thousands of people, but you might still get wrong information. Also note exactly what Ashley said before. There's this place on the PSLF help tool where if you have a loan that's being consolidated and the government just doesn't know that that's in the pipeline because it hasn't been processed yet, it's not going to let you generate your public service loan forgiveness certification unless you click, no, I haven't made 120 qualifying payments. Even if you know you have, you're sure you're right, you're doing everything we're telling you, it's just a block in the system and you have to roll with it to be able to get to the next screen. So we just wanted to flag, like, this is a pain point for folks. We've heard from people that have been tripped up because it doesn't seem right. It's not right, but it is the way the technology works and you just have to roll with it. We also know that lots of people are getting weird information about what payments count from their student loan servicer directly, whether that's MyFedLoan, which is the company that handled PSLF applications up until July, or Mohila, who handles applications going forward. People are getting counts of qualifying payments that aren't right. They're not consistent with the rules of the waiver. That's because there's just a lot of back and forth happening and hundreds of thousands of applications all being processed at once. Do know that the Education Department is the one that's going to notify you when it's time for you to have your debt canceled. And if you get something that doesn't seem right in between now and then, don't lose hope. This is just the system working its way through, and your debts are going to get canceled as long as you get your paperwork on time. I'm going to hand it back to Ashley.
And Mike, actually, do you mind finishing us out?
Absolutely do that. So just a couple reminders at the very end here. The last things that you need to do to be able to get over the finish line. We talked through how to do each of these already today. So just as a reminder, first confirm that you have a qualified employer. You can do that using the PSLF help tool. You consolidate your loans if you need to, and we walked through how to do that step by step. Submit your PSLF forms, certifying your service, telling the government how long you've worked in public service. That requires an employer signature, so it does take a little bit of time, but once that's done, the government can track you and can cancel your debt and reward you for the service that you've already completed. You have to do all of this. So submit your forms, consolidate your loans, get your paperwork moving by October 31st. It doesn't mean it needs to be processed by then. It just means you need to have taken the steps that you can take by October 31st. So I just want to flag that there are some problems that folks have encountered about getting an employer recognized or getting an answer back from a student loan company about your payment count. You're not going to be able to get your debts canceled by October 31st if you're just starting this process right now. The line of folks waiting for debt cancellation is just too long. So just know that if you've taken the steps you've done, as Ashley put it, if you can do the things you can do by October 31st, the government's going to take care of the rest, and it may take a few more months, but it'll happen. I do want to flag a couple more times that there are tons of great resources on the Education Department's website to be able to get on track here. Of course, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Help tool that we've looked at a few different times today has lots of great information. There's more general information on studentaid.gov. When it's time for you to submit your employer certification form, your PSLF application, to your student loan company, this company, Mohila, is the company that's going to process that. You can submit that by US mail if you're not currently a Mohila customer, or you can fax it. And I know that's a bad thing to hear right now because it's 2022 and I can't believe you can't do this electronically. But if you're not a Mohila customer, you have to do this by snail mail or by fax. So one thing that we recommend if you're doing this, because it's so close to the deadline, you probably won't hear back before October. So if you're going to submit it by mail, go to the post office and get a receipt from the post office that shows you mailed the letter. If you submit it by fax, if you go to Kinko's or the library to use a fax machine, make sure that you get the confirmation that shows that you sent the fax. Hang on to that. In case your records get lost or in case processing gets delayed, it gives you some proof that you actually did do the things you could do by the deadline. If you're already a Mohila customer, if you have some direct loans that are handled by Mohila and you're still going through this process, you can electronically upload this stuff to Mohila, but only if you're a Mohila customer for a loan the government owns. With that, I think we are ready to take some questions.
Well, thank you very, very much. Thanks to all of you who are participating. Bree, Nathan, who is going to conduct this Q&A? Nathan, you going to do it?
Yeah, well, before we get into the Q&A, we actually have someone on the call here who has actually been a recipient of loan forgiveness through the waiver period. So I would like to take the opportunity here to give the floor to Sharmalyn Fairley, who can provide a little bit of her story in attaining forgiveness.
Thank you, Nathan. This is Sharmalyn Fairley. I am an employee of the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm a psychologist for the VA. And I just recently on August 26th received public service loan forgiveness. And it was a little over $100,000 that I was forgiven. And it was only because of the waiver that I've been forgiven at this point. I completed my PhD in 2005. I was with Sally Mae and then with Navient. And with Navient, they told me lots of stuff that, including that I was in the right qualifying payments, and I was not. They never even told me about certifying my employment. And so at the point that I decided that I needed to start certifying my employment, I found out about that. I called them and they said, we're not the PSLF servicer. And so I did not know that, and I'd been paying on my loans for a few years. They said that I needed to consolidate. So I went through the process of consolidating with Fed loans, turning in my first ECF, my PSLF form. And I had approximately 50 payments because I've been in and out of forbearance. I would call and say, I can't afford these payments. They would say, okay, we'll put you in forbearance instead of putting me in an income-driven program. So in 2018, I was about, have been paying for approximately 4 years and had about 50 payments when I went to Fed loans. So over the course of that time, I continued to pay, and then we came into the COVID period. And so then I started getting credit for the COVID period and not paying, but receiving that credit. When the waiver came out, which was, I think that was in 2020, I started getting updates from Fed loans saying that we're looking at the waiver, we're counting the things differently, just you'll continue to get updates from us. And so eventually I went from having 54 payments to having 118 payments, and then realizing that I was very close to being forgiven. And part of that was because they said any payment that happened or didn't happen before January 2013, even though I wasn't paying, I was going to get credit for that. So that time between 2007 and 2013, when I wasn't paying, the government, because of the waiver, gave me credit for that. So that's the deferment and forbearance that Ashley was talking about. And so I ended up this year realizing that I was going to be at 120 payments. So I hit my 120th payment on June 1st. And again, it was only because of the waiver, because I probably had paid about 5 years into the system. And I hit my 120th payment on June 1st. And from that day forward, I was checking Fed loan and checking student aid, checking the Department of Education site every day to see if my loans were forgiven. And finally, on August the 26th, they were. I logged in and saw a balance of 0. And I immediately thought, they've transferred my loans to Mohila. But I called and they said, no, congratulations, you've been forgiven. And approximately, that was a Friday. So by Monday, they had sent me a letter to the Department of Education saying that my loans were completely forgiven, that I no longer owed them. And again, it was a little over $100,000, which is life-changing for someone who thought that I probably would never pay my loans off, and that it would be something that I took to my grave with me. So I am really excited about the program. I tell anybody, you have to do it. I tell them about the deadline, but I'm also just really grateful to the Biden administration for seeing the problem and doing something about it, because that hadn't been done before. June was the first time that I had was able to say, yes, I have 120 payments, so I was never denied. But I do know people who were denied, and they had paid in for 10 years and were denied for technical reasons. And even though they were given, information that was erroneous and followed the information, they were not forgiven at that time. And so under the Biden administration, they have been forgiven. So I'm just thankful for that, and thankful for the forgiveness, and just, anyone who's thinking about it or is on the fence, or, this is too good to be true. I thought that too, until I got my $0 letter saying that I was 100% forgiven for all of those loans that I'd taken out for graduate school. So thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you very, very much. That is great to hear. And I've been monitoring the chat room here. There are a lot of people who are praying to join you, Ms. Fairley. And so I also pray that they will meet with similar results. The fact of the matter is, we know from the statistics, over $10 billion already So there are a lot of people that are benefiting from this. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Now, who is monitoring the Q&A? I see you raise hands. I'm gonna turn it back to you, Nathan.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. So I just want to let everybody know, this has been a great presentation, and we want to make sure that you have it ready for you whenever you want to go back and refer to it. And so we want to let you know that this is being recorded and will get sent out to everyone who has registered here. It will get sent to you in the next couple of days. So you'll get the recording as well as the slide deck that Ashley and Mike both presented on. So Kat has actually been monitoring the chat here. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Kat so that she can help get some of these questions answered here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nate. To start, to Mike and Ashley, we've gotten a couple of questions about people who might not yet be at their 120 payments. And so they're curious if they might be under either 10 years of service or have less than 120 qualifying payments. Can this waiver period still benefit them?
Absolutely. I tell everyone, just get the form in. It's not just for people at 120. Even if you've only been in repayment 2 years or 5 years, it doesn't hurt. PSLF is not going away. It'll still be here. It's just the waiver. And you want to make sure that we look at your account under the waiver as much as possible, because these are more generous rules. So go ahead and get the form in. It doesn't hurt. It can't harm you. Just get your form in so you can take advantage of this waiver, and then you can keep working towards PSLF after that.
Awesome. And then for people who say they actually might be on the other end of that, either they are post 120 qualifying payments and they're retired, or they're no longer working in public service, can they still get credit during this waiver period, even if they don't currently have a qualifying employer?
Absolutely. And that's why this waiver period is definitely for you. Because under normal rules, you have to be an employee of a qualifying public service employer when you apply for and get forgiveness. Under the waiver, we're not worried about that. So if you're retired, or you just work part-time, or you work in the private sector, still get your stuff in now. Get the credit. Even if you think you might not have 120, go ahead and get the credit. Get as much credit now as possible. And then later on, if you only have like 119 months and you need to go work in a month for a public service org just to get forgiveness, maybe you can do that. But get your forms in. If you're retired, you have 120, now is the time for you. Absolutely.
And then we've gotten questions for people wondering, so who actually should be signing the form in my building? So for example, if someone's in a school, does it have to be their supervisor or the front office? And likewise with any job, who should be signing that form?
It's usually someone in your HR department. It's someone who is able to certify that you worked at this on this date for these number of hours for this period. So it's usually your HR department. Some places let your supervisor do it. It depends on your employer, but it's usually your HR department.
Awesome. And then what was the website again for checking if your employer qualifies?
You want to go to studentaid.gov/PSLF for the help tool.
Awesome. And then for people who might work at private schools, do those count as qualifying employers?
If it's a 501c3 or a type of nonprofit, I think it would probably qualify as a public education, but if it's a for-profit school, no.
And then also, we have a couple of questions about people who had in-school deferment. So I'll ask the first one, and there's just letting you know there's a follow-up. So do periods of in-school deferment count for the purposes of PSLF?
No.
And then for someone, if someone said, actually, I was in school, I had my loans, they were put in school deferment, but I actually asked my servicer not to put them in school deferment. Are there steps this person can take to get that remedied? So they actually said, I don't want my loans put in school deferment, but their servicer did so anyway.
Okay, that's a good question. Couple of things. So first, your loan going to in-school deferment is like automatic. You can opt out of in-school deferment only if you had previously been in repayment. So if you went to school, left, went back to school, or went back for your second degree and you'd already been in repayment, when you go back to school, your loans are going to automatically go into in-school deferment. And then you can say, no, I want to stay in repayment, and you can opt out, but you'd have to call your servicer and actually opt out. If you've never been in repayment, you can't opt out of the deferment. So And if you feel like you asked to be, if that you're in that prior situation where you've previously been in deferment and you previously been in repayment, you tried to opt out of deferment and your servicer wouldn't let you, then you can submit a reconsideration request and we can take a look at that, because that is wrong information from your servicer. So you can submit a PSLF reconsideration request. But normally you can't opt out of deferment unless you've previously been in repayment. If you're currently in school and your loans are in deferment and you're working full-time, you might want to opt out of in-school deferment if you've been in repayment before, because if you're working full-time in public service, you could be getting credit for these months towards PSLF. You could be taking credit part in the payment pause right now. You can get an IDR plan once it's over. And if you have previous loans, you can consolidate them all together under the waiver and get that extra credit for the newer loans. But you can only do that if you opt out of that in-school deferment, because you can't even consolidate when your loans are on in-school deferment.
Thanks, Ashley. And then we've also gotten a lot of questions about people who have multiple employers. So does someone need to submit a PSLF form for every single qualifying employer that they've had?
You got to submit a PSLF form for every single employer and period of employment that you want to get credit for. If you want it to count towards your 120, there's got to be a form for that. It has to be after October 2007, because that's when Congress created PSLF. But if you want credit for that month, we have to have a form.
And then for people who maybe said their employer is they no longer exist, so they can't get in contact with the old employer, or they just can't find their EIN, are there other ways that they can verify their employment?
Well, you're going to need that EIN because you need that for the form. But if you absolutely can't get a signature, right? We want you to get a signature. That's your best bet. That's your holy grail. But if you absolutely can't get a signature because that employer closed, or you want something from 2010 and they only have records from 2015 on, right? They can't sign it. They don't have those records. If that is the case, you can submit a W-2, or you can submit pay stubs and deposit records for those months. But you are going to have to submit something that shows that you were employed by that employer.
And then Ashley, people are asking questions about payment. So if someone has a $0 IDR payment, does that count towards PSLF?
Yeah, absolutely. That's your payment.
And then one more question, another favorite one that we went through. During the payment pause, so their payments have been paused since March of 2020. Do those still count for the purposes of PSLF?
As long as you still have qualifying employment, yes. So if you've been able to be employed at a qualifying PSLF employer for this entire time or any part of that time, you can get credit for every single one of these months. If you have it for the full time, that's 30 months towards the 120, and you're more than a fourth of the way towards your 120 required for forgiveness. That's incredible.
And then again, one more time, does this apply to retirees? So people who, they already put in their 10 years of qualifying service, can they still go back and do the PSLF waiver?
Yes, and I want you to do it now before the waiver is over, because I want you to take part of the one piece of the waiver, which is you don't have to currently be working in public service to get forgiveness.
And then really quickly, before we get to the next question, we've gotten a lot of questions about, will this be shared? As Nate mentioned earlier, this recording is going to be shared. So yes, you will get a copy of this. And then we've also gotten a couple of questions about broad-based cancellation. And I wanted to wait a little bit towards the end because I wanted to make sure we weren't mixing that with PSLF. Do you mind walking through the process again for broad-based cancellation and what that update is that you went through at the top of the deck?
Yes. So if you made less than $125,000 for a single person in 2020 or 2021, so during the pandemic, or $250,000 for a household, and you have federal loans, you are eligible for debt relief, for one-time debt relief. It's up to $10,000 if you didn't receive a Pell Grant, and up to $20,000 if you did receive a Pell Grant. The application will be available by early October. We're working very hard to make it as simple as possible, as easy to do as possible, so that everybody can get their forgiveness. The goal is that once you apply, your forgiveness will be processed within 4 to 6 weeks. And hopefully for folks who no longer have debt after that, they will never have to enter repayment again, because our goal is to get it done before repayment restarts. But that's the parameters for that. More information is available at studentaid.gov/debt relief. Even if you're waiting for debt relief, right? Even if you're doing that, still get your PSLF stuff in, because you may have more than 20K or more than 10K, and you can get the rest forgiven through PSLF. But you don't want to miss out on this deadline. You want to get as much relief and have access to as many programs as possible. You can get both. One does not cancel out the other.
And then One quick question, Ashley, just two more quick ones. One, someone said for cancellation, is that going to be their actual income or their adjusted gross income?
It's going to be your AGI.
And then we've also gotten a lot of questions. I'm switching back to PSLF, so I want to make sure people know that we're switching gears talking about public service loan forgiveness. People have asked different questions about, for example, their qualifying employer. So does it matter what industry they're in? So if they teach at a Title I school versus another public school that's not classified as Title I, or they might not be a teacher in their school, or someone says, I work for the government, doesn't matter what my job is. I see you shaking your head, so I'll stop.
Listen, we're not going to ask you that. You can see it on the form, but nowhere on the form does it say, tell us your job title, right? We don't care. We're not asking you what you do for them. We're not asking you your salary. We're not asking anything like that. We just want to know who you work for, who pays you, who's on that W-2, who's on that pay stub. And if it fits in one of those qualifying employer definitions, that's all we care about. You are a public servant and you can get credit for your service.
And then Ashley, for service members, is this something that applies to them as well? Are there any other steps they need to take or any different forms they might be able to use to certify the periods where they're in service?
Yes, you can get credit for your time in service if you were full-time active duty service. And you can certify your employment by filling out that first page of the PSLF form, right? Which just has like your information, your social security, all of that, so we can identify you. And then you can attach your DD-214 if you are a veteran, or you can attach your SCRA printout if you are still in active duty status. So you can just attach that to that first page and submit all of that to MOHELA.
And then Ashley, do you mind going through the process again for people who might have Parent Plus loans, if there are ways that those can qualify?
Yes. If you have Parent Plus loans, Parent Plus borrowers can get PSLF, but you want to be for PSLF to really give you some benefit, right? You want to be on an income-based plan because our standard plan is a 10-year fully amortizing plan. So if you're on a Parent Plus loan, you're on a 10-year plan, or any loan, you're on a 10-year plan, you're not going to have anything to forgive theoretically at the end of your 120. For Parent Plus borrowers to get access to income-based repayment, they have to consolidate. Once they consolidate, they have a direct consolidation loan with an underlying Parent Plus loan. That new direct consolidation loan now has access to one of the income-based plans, because there's multiple, right? One of the plans, it's called ICR, Income Contingent Repayment. It is an income-based plan, but it is the least generous of the plans. So parents could get a lower payment by staying on an extended or graduated plan, which then doesn't count towards normal PSLF, right? So we want parents to weigh that out, use our loan simulator, do what makes the most sense for them. But they would, to get on an IBR plan, they have to consolidate and then they get ICR. So there are a lot of Parent Plus borrowers who have direct consolidation loans with underlying Parent Plus because they want to get ICR and they want to get PSLF. Fast forward to the waiver, right? That's normal PSLF. Under the waiver, direct consolidation loans, people are getting credit for pre-consolidation time and repayment. That's only the case if it's not a Parent Plus loan. So if you had direct consolidation loans that have the underlying FEL or Perkins loans and they're your student loans, remember we talked about that? You can get credit for the time prior to consolidation under the waiver. But if you have a direct consolidation loan that only has underlying Parent Plus, you're not going to get any additional time when it was purely a regular old, just a Parent Plus loan. So you want to get additional time for that. But if after consolidation, you missed a payment or you were on the wrong repayment plan, you could get credit for that time under the waiver because that's how it works for all direct consolidation loans. And if you had a Parent Plus loan in your own student loans, that's so complicated, I'm so sorry. If you had a Parent Plus loan in your own student loans and consolidated those together, then that direct consolidation loan could get additional credit for the underlying student loan, just not for the Parent Plus loan. And then that would apply to the entire consolidation loan under the waiver, because remember, under the waiver, when you consolidate, you get credit for all of the loans for the entire new loan, and so loans can get forgiven sooner. I feel like there has got to be a better, more simpler way to explain this, but I have not figured it out yet, and I have said it so many times.
Thank you for breaking that down. I know that's a more complicated one. Ashley, I'm going to ask this one more time because I know, just so also people know where to find this, we're still getting some questions about what's a qualifying employer. So for example, someone says, I work in emergency services. Can that count? And then can you also tell people where they might be able to find a list of qualifying employers?
Yes, you want to go to our help tool, our employer search tool, and you'll need the EIN, and you can look it up and see what we think. Again, our tool is not perfect. It doesn't have every single qualifying employer, but it gives you a sense. So it has to be a nonprofit or a government entity. And yes, emergency services is a qualifying in qualifying service. So it should, based on what you're saying, qualify, but it has to be a nonprofit, and you'll have to, and if it's not in our help tool, you're gonna have to submit a form, it has to go through adjudication.
Ashley, and then for people who are
Actually, be sure that on some emergency services could be a tag hung on some private corporation that may not qualify, but you got to be careful with that.
Yes.
So don't go with the title, go with the employer.
Yep. Absolutely right, sir. Thank you.
And Ashley, we've also gotten a question about what someone should do if they're currently in default.
It's a good question. So we also announced an initiative called Fresh Start. We got a lot of initiatives and they have cool names. So Fresh Start, we're making it so that borrowers who were in default can now, we're going to make you current. You can continue working towards managing your student loans after that. So that will be implemented later this year. So you wouldn't get credit for time in default. Under Fresh Start, we're going to make it so that you, as if you were not in default for a payment policy, you could get credit for that. Or you can get credit for time prior to you enter default. Like if you've only been in default for 3 years, but prior to that, you were in PSLF and you were in repayment, you could submit forms for that. But you can't actually get forgiveness until you're out of default. So once we take you out of default, you can keep working towards that and stay on that, and then you'll be able to get forgiveness. I feel like that was a clear way to explain it, but maybe not.
Yes. And then one question, I'm sorry to switch gears again, but I want everyone to know now talking about broad-based cancellation, because we've gotten this question a couple times. We have some people who are currently asking, they said, I'm currently in school. Can people who are currently enrolled in school benefit from the broad cancellation announcement?
Yep, that is for everybody.
Awesome. And I think we have time for just one more question. So I just want to make sure we get to as many as possible. Some people are asking, so there were periods where they were working in qualified employment, but they may not have been making, they may not have been actually making payments. Do you mind talking again about what this waiver, how it extends, what actually might qualify? And then also some people are asking, for example, they said, what happens if I consolidate? Am I going to lose my previous payments? Do you mind just walking through one more time, like the really big changes for this waiver process?
Yep. So under the waiver, consolidation doesn't start you at zero. First big change. I know you've heard it so many times over the years. Don't consolidate, you start at zero. Under the waiver, not the case. You do not have to start at zero. So this is the time to consolidate. There's never been a better time to consolidate. So under the waiver, you don't start at zero. First big change. We're not looking at what repayment plan you're on. Second big change. So we talked about you got to be on IDR. There's all these IDR plans. There's extended graduate, there's standard. We literally are not looking at what repayment plan you have been on under the waiver. Don't care. It's as if like there was a column that says payment, 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 and then here's the repayment plan. We're not even gonna look at this column. We don't care. If you missed a payment, we don't care. If the payment was late, we don't care. If the payment was a couple dollars short, we don't care. What we care about is if you were in active repayment status, and we define it very generously. As long as you weren't in default, as long as you weren't in school, as long as you weren't in your grace period, you can get credit. We're even counting some periods of deferment and forbearances. So all the stuff you've heard before about all these reasons you can't qualify, a lot of them are gone. So please apply, please take advantage of this opportunity, because this is time limited. We are going to go back to normal rules, and we want you to get as much credit as possible so that then going forward, yes, going forward, get back on IDR. Make sure you're doing, like, you want to do that going forward. Don't miss your payment, stuff like that, right? But right now we're not looking at that. So just do it, get into the waiver, and then you can keep working towards PSLF after that.
Thanks so much, Ashley.
So have we come to the end?
Yes, sir. We can close everybody out now.
Let me begin by thanking Ashley and where's your sidekick, Ashley? He's gone.
No, he's here, Congressman. There's Mike.
Oh, they are. Thank you, Mike. You guys have been great. As you know, it's the second time we've done this. We had over 500 tonight. We did this before. It was in excess of 700, and there are thousands more. So we want to ask all of you, your fraternities, your sororities, Masonic groups, your churches, your friends, whoever you may come in contact with, we've got until October 31st to take advantage of this waiver. And it's not going to be extended. I've been talking with the president and others at the White House. The fact of the matter is, we are in a position now that is now or never, because the Biden administration has determined that they will not be able to extend this beyond October 31st. And I don't need to go into that tonight, but I understand exactly why they're not doing it. And if I did not feel that it made sense, I think all of you know I would be saying it, but it does make sense. So let's do this now. That does not mean that those of us in the Congress who feel that more needs to be done will not be trying to do so legislatively. I'm committed to doing more legislatively, and we are going to continue to work on this issue. So thank you so much for participating this evening. I look forward to interacting with you going in the future, and let's all give cheers to Ashley and Mike.